The chamber doors opened with a sound like thunder rolling through mountains. Ambassador Marcus Webb stepped forward into a space so vast that Earth's largest stadium could have fit inside 3 times over. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above, while below, the floor was transparent, revealing the swirling clouds of the gas giant planet Terminus Prime far beneath his feet. Walking on nothing, suspended above a world that could swallow Earth whole, was the Council's first message to newcomers. You are small, and we are vast. Around him, rising in circular tiers that climbed toward that infinite darkness, sat the representatives of 417 civilizations. Some were humanoid, others were clouds of gas contained in crystalline shells. Still others were beings of pure energy that flickered and pulsed with colors that had no names in human languages. The translation field activated automatically, filling the air with a susurrus of whispers as thousands of conversations continued. Barely pausing to acknowledge the human's arrival, Marcus had prepared for this moment for 3 years. He had studied every available recording of council proceedings, memorized the hierarchies and ancient grudges, learned which species valued directness and which considered it an insult. He wore a simple black suit, Earth's diplomatic uniform, chosen specifically because it made no claims to grandeur. Let them see us as we are, his superiors had decided. No pretense, no posturing, but as he reached the center of the chamber, where a single platform marked the speaking position, Marcus felt the weight of those alien eyes upon him. This was humanity's first formal appearance before the Galactic Council. Everything he said, every gesture he made, would set the template for how his species would be treated for generations to come. The Council recognizes the human delegation, announced High Arbiter Venn, whose crystalline body refracted light into rainbow patterns that hurt to look at directly. You stand before us to answer charges of territorial violation, unauthorized colonization, and disregard for established claim precedents. How do you respond? Marcus kept his voice steady, projecting it clearly across the vast space. With respect, High Arbiter, we respond that we followed every law we were made aware of. When humanity achieved faster-than-light travel 40 years ago, we were given the Covenant of Silent Expansion by your own First Contact team. We have violated none of its provisions. The Covenant was amended, said Executor Drell, the Carinth representative whose slug-like body glistened with moisture under the chamber's lights. All species were notified through standard channels. Your failure to receive this notification is your own inadequacy. We maintain monitoring stations on 73 Council communication frequencies, Marcus replied. Our records show no transmission of any amendment. If the Council changed its laws and failed to notify a member species, surely the fault lies with the Council's communication protocols, not with the species that was never informed. A ripple moved through the chamber. Several delegates leaned forward, interested now. It was rare for a newcomer species to challenge procedure directly. Most spent their first century in the Council simply trying to understand the labyrinthine rules that governed galactic civilization, Prelate Thomas's, the mantis-like being whose ceremonial robes marked him as one of the Council's senior members, clicked his mandibles in what might have been amusement or irritation. Bold words from a species barely 50 years into space travel. The Carinth sovereignty has held development rights to Sector 447 for 300 of your years. Your colony on the world you call New Terra is illegal. The law does not care about your ignorance. Then perhaps the law is unjust, Marcus said quietly. The chamber erupted. Dozens of species began speaking at once, their words overlapping in a cacophony of outrage and shock. To question the Council's laws was to question the order that had kept the galaxy stable for 10,000 years. Species had been expelled for less. Venn's voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. Silence. The word carried a harmonic that made Marcus's bones vibrate. Human, you will explain yourself, carefully. Marcus took a breath. This was the moment. Everything hung on what he said next. High Arbiter, with all due respect to this august body, I ask a simple question. If a species claims development rights to a sector but does nothing with it for 300 years, at what point does that claim expire? The Carinth have not visited Sector 447 in over a century. They have established no stations, no outposts, no development of any kind. They simply claimed it and left it empty. The claim is still valid? Drell insisted, his eye stalks quivering. We are a patient people. We develop our territories on timescales your brief species cannot comprehend. Or, Marcus said, his voice hardening, you claimed far more territory than you could ever use, simply to prevent other species from having it. I've studied the claim registries. Executor Drell, the Carinth sovereignty has registered development rights to over 2,000 star systems. Your entire civilization only actively occupies 47 of them. You're hoarding the galaxy like a dragon hoards gold. The chamber exploded again, but this time the tone was different. Marcus could hear it in the translation whispers. Some species were angry at his impertinence, but others were intrigued. How many of them, he wondered, had been denied expansion because the old powers had claimed everything first? Ven studied him with eyes that saw in spectrums humans couldn't perceive. You accuse the Carinth of abuse of the claim system. Do you have evidence? I have the claim registries themselves, Marcus said. He activated his datapad and holographic displays blossomed around him, showing star maps overlaid with claim boundaries. 63 species control 98% of all registered development claims. The remaining 354 species share the remaining 2%. This isn't a council, High Arbiter. It's a cartel. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus had just spoken aloud what hundreds of species had whispered among themselves for centuries, but never dared say in open session. The claim system, which had once been designed to prevent conflicts over territory, had become a tool for the powerful to maintain their dominance over the weak. This session is recessed, Ven announced abruptly. The Council will deliberate on these matters. The human delegation will remain available for further questioning. As the delegates began to file out, Marcus remained standing on his platform above the clouds of Terminus Prime. He had just made humanity either very powerful friends or very dangerous enemies. Possibly both. Captain Rita Vance appeared at his elbow, her expression neutral but her eyes bright. That was either brilliant or suicidal, Ambassador. Maybe both, Marcus admitted. He watched as Executor Drell glided toward the exit, surrounded by his aides. The Carinth representative turned back once, his eye stalks fixing on Marcus with unmistakable hostility. Marcus smiled slightly and nodded in acknowledgement. Let them be angry. Humanity hadn't come to the stars to bow and scrape before ancient empires. They had come to claim their place among them. And if that meant challenging 10,000 years of established order, so be it, because humanity had learned something from their own bloody history. Something these comfortable civilizations had forgotten. The old order never surrenders power willingly. It has to be taken, and Marcus had just fired the opening shot. The diplomatic quarters assigned to the human delegation were luxurious by any standard, but Marcus barely noticed the floating gardens or the walls that shifted colors with his mood. He sat at the curved desk reviewing files while Rita paced near the panoramic window that showed Terminus Prime's perpetual storm systems churning below. They're scared, Rita said without turning around. I watched their faces during your speech. The smaller delegations, the ones who barely get a voice in council decisions. You gave them hope. Hope is dangerous, Marcus replied, scrolling through another document. It makes people take risks they normally wouldn't. Isn't that what we want? Before Marcus could answer, the door chimed. The holographic display identified their visitor as Ambassador Kellen, representative of the Tauric Concordat. Marcus had never heard of them, which told him everything he needed to know. They were one of the powerless species, the ones whose voices were drowned out by the ancient empires. Enter, Marcus called. The door dissolved, and a being that resembled a bipedal fox with silver fur and 3 tails stepped inside. Kellen's eyes were a startling violet, and they darted around the room before settling on Marcus with an intensity that suggested desperation. Ambassador Webb, I must speak with you privately. What I have to say could endanger both our species if overheard. Rita moved toward the door, but Marcus gestured for her to stay. Captain Vance has my complete trust. Speak freely. Kellen's tails twitched nervously. Very well. What you said in the council chamber today about the claim system being a cartel, it was the truth we have all known but feared to speak. The Tauric people have been trying to expand beyond our home system for 6 generations. Every nearby star we investigate has already been claimed by the Carinth, or the Vrel hegemony, or one of the other founding species. We are trapped in a single system while empires that span hundreds of worlds tell us we must be patient. How many others are in your situation? Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer from his research. Hundreds of species. Perhaps more. We are the forgotten ones, the late arrivals who came to the galactic stage after all the territory had been divided. We are permitted to exist, but not to grow. Not to thrive. Kellen's voice carried a bitterness that resonated with Marcus. He thought of Earth's own history, of colonialism and empires that claim the right to divide the world among themselves while ignoring those who already live there. What do you want from us? Rita asked bluntly. Alliance, Kellen said simply. You humans have something we lack. You do not fear the Council. You walked into that chamber and challenged the fundamental structure of galactic civilization. Either you are fools or you have a plan. I am betting on the latter. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying the Tauric ambassador carefully. This was the moment his superiors on Earth had anticipated. The question wasn't whether the smaller species would approach humanity, but how quickly it would happen and what price they would demand. The Tauric Concordat has a population of 6 billion, Marcus said. You possess advanced biotechnology that surpasses most of the galaxy. Your neural interface systems are remarkable. What you lack is the political power to use any of it. You have been researching us, Kellen observed. We research everyone. It's what we do. Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking down at the swirling storms. Let me tell you what happens next, Ambassador Kellen. The Council will deliberate for exactly as long as it takes them to coordinate a response that preserves their power structure. They will offer humanity a compromise that seems generous but actually changes nothing. They will expect us to be grateful and to accept our place as junior members of their system. And you will refuse, Kellen said, his tails becoming still. We will refuse, Marcus confirmed. But not immediately. First, we will negotiate. We will make demands that seem reasonable. We will act like we believe their system can be reformed from within. And while we do that, we will be gathering allies. Species like yours who have been shut out for too long. Rita crossed her arms. You're talking about building a coalition against the founding species. That's not reform, Ambassador. That's revolution. Revolution is such a dramatic word, Marcus said with a slight smile. I prefer to think of it as correcting a historical imbalance. Kellen's ears flattened against his head, a sign of stress in his species. If you fail, if the Council crushes this movement before it gains momentum, everyone associated with it will be destroyed. The Tauric Concordat could lose everything. That's true, Marcus acknowledged. But what exactly would you be losing? A single star system you're not allowed to leave? Permission to exist at the sufferance of species who view you as inferior? He turned from the window to face Kellen directly. Your people are already prisoners. We're offering you a chance to be free. But freedom has always required risk. Kellen was silent for a long moment, his tail swishing in an agitated pattern. Finally he spoke. What do you need from us? Information, Marcus said immediately. Every council species has secrets, things they don't want known publicly. Trading scandals, violations of their own laws, instances where they bent the rules to benefit themselves. The founding species have built their power on the appearance of legitimacy. We need to show the galaxy what lies beneath that appearance. You want us to spy for you. I want you to collect the truth. What you do with that truth is spying. What we do with it is justice. Rita made a sound that might have been a laugh or a cough. That's some impressive rhetoric, Ambassador. Kellen's tail stopped moving. He had made his decision. The Tauric Concordat will support humanity in this endeavor. But we cannot do so publicly, not yet. If the Council learns of our cooperation before you have sufficient allies, they will make an example of us. Understood. For now, our relationship remains unofficial. Continue to act as you always have in Council sessions. Vote with the majority, raise no objections. Let them think you are still one of the compliant masses. While we feed you information that will help you dismantle them. Kellen's violet eyes held a gleam that might have been satisfaction. There's a certain poetry to it. After Kellen left, Rita turned to Marcus with an expression he couldn't quite read. You're playing a very dangerous game. If Earth's government knew you were coordinating what amounts to an insurrection against the Council, they might recall you. Earth's government sent me here precisely because they knew this was necessary, Marcus replied. We didn't spend 40 years studying the Council just to join their system and accept whatever scraps they threw us. Humanity has fought too many wars against imperialism to become another subjugated species. The founding species have technology we can't match. If this turns into a real conflict, technology isn't everything. The Council has grown comfortable, complacent. They haven't fought a real war in centuries because their system is designed to prevent wars through overwhelming established power. But there are other kinds of conflict. Economic pressure, information warfare, political maneuvering. We don't need to beat them militarily. We need to make the cost of maintaining their system higher than the benefits it provides. Rita walked to the desk and looked at the files Marcus had been reviewing. These are communication intercepts. Where did you get them? Let's just say that when the Council installed their translation and communication systems in our embassy quarters, they didn't account for human cryptography expertise. We've been listening to private Council communications for 6 months. You've been spying on the Council while sitting in their headquarters. We've been doing our homework, Marcus corrected. And what we've learned is that the Council is far more fragile than it appears. There are rivalries between the founding species, disputes over resources and territory that they keep hidden from the general membership. The only thing holding them together is their mutual interest in maintaining the status quo. Once we start pulling at that thread, the whole thing might unravel. Raito was quiet for a moment. My father fought in the corporate wars back on Earth. He used to say that every empire falls eventually, usually from its own weight. The question isn't whether it will collapse, but whether something better rises to take its place. Then we had better make sure something better is waiting, Marcus said. He pulled up a star map showing the sectors surrounding Earth. Humanity controls one system, but we have allies now, even if they don't know it yet. And allies can become a coalition. A coalition can become a movement. And a movement can change the galaxy, or get us all killed. That too, Marcus admitted with a grim smile. But at least we'll die free. The Council reconvened 3 days later, and Marcus knew immediately that something had changed. The chamber felt different, charged with a tension that hadn't been there before. The founding species delegates had positioned themselves in a coordinated arrangement, a unified front that sent a clear message. They had discussed his challenge and formulated their response, High Arbiter. Then's crystalline form seemed to pulse with barely contained energy as the session began. The Council has deliberated on the matters raised by the human delegation. We have examined the claim registry system and found it to be functioning as intended. However, in recognition of legitimate concerns about accessibility for newer species, we propose the following reforms. A holographic display materialized above the chamber floor, showing proposed changes to the claim system. Marcus scanned them quickly, his expression neutral even as his mind raced through the implications. They were offering to create a lottery. System where unclaimed sectors would be distributed randomly among species who had been waiting longest for expansion rights. It was a masterful political move. It appeared to address the concerns he had raised while actually changing nothing fundamental about the power structure. The founding species would retain their thousands of claimed systems, and the newer species would fight among themselves for the scraps that remained unclaimed. The Council believes this represents a fair and equitable solution, Venn continued. The human delegation will have 48 hours to respond. Marcus rose from his seat. The human delegation appreciates the Council's consideration of these matters. However, we require clarification on several points before we can offer a formal response. Executor Drell's eye stalks swiveled toward him. What clarification does the human require? The proposed lottery system applies only to unclaimed sectors. Our colony on New Terra is located in a claimed sector. Does this reform address the situation that brought us here, or are we still expected to abandon 17,000 colonists? The chamber went silent. Marcus had just reminded everyone that the Council's proposed reforms did nothing to solve the immediate crisis that had triggered this entire debate. Prelate Thomases clicked his mandibles slowly. The New Terra situation remains unchanged. The Carinth claim is valid under both current and proposed regulations. Your colony must be evacuated within the specified time period. Then the reforms are meaningless, Marcus said flatly. You're offering to change the rules for future expansion while using the old rules to punish us for expanding before we knew those rules existed. That's not justice. That's selective enforcement designed to maintain existing power structures. Your ignorance of the law is not our problem, Drell said, his voice wet and thick with satisfaction. The Carinth sovereignty has been patient, but our patience has limits. If your colonists are not removed from New Terra within 27 days, we will remove them ourselves. Raita, standing beside Marcus in her official capacity as security chief, whispered urgently. Ambassador, we need to speak privately. Marcus nodded and requested a brief recess. Once outside the chamber, in a secure human facility, Rita activated a quantum-encrypted communication link to Earth. Director Hammond's face appeared on the screen, his expression grim. We've been monitoring the session, Hammond said without preamble. The Council isn't going to back down on New Terra. They can't afford to look weak after you challenge them so publicly. Then we proceed to Phase 2, Marcus replied. We have the information Kellen and the other species provided. It's time to use it. Are you sure? Once you cross this line, there's no going back. The Council will view it as an act of war. They already view us as enemies, Director. They're just being polite about it. Marcus pulled up files on his datapad. The Carinth want New Terra. Fine. But they're going to pay for it in ways they never imagined. Rita leaned in to look at the screen. Sir, what Marcus is proposing will destabilize galactic politics for decades. That's the idea, Hammond said. The status quo is killing us slowly. Better to burn it down and see what grows from the ashes. You have Earth's authorization, Ambassador? Make them regret threatening humanity. The communication ended. Marcus took a deep breath and looked at Retta. Contact all the species we've been building relationships with. Tell them it's time. Tomorrow's session is going to change everything. The next day, Marcus entered the council chamber with a different energy. He carried himself not as a supplicant requesting mercy, but as a prosecutor preparing to present evidence. When Ven called the session to order and asked if humanity had considered the Council's generous offer, Marcus smiled. We have considered it, High Arbiter, and we have a counterproposal. Before we discuss reforms to the claim system, I believe the Council needs to address some irregularities in how that system has been used. He activated his datapad, and holographic displays blossomed throughout the chamber. Financial records, communication intercepts, secret treaties. Years of information that should have been private, now exposed for all to see. This is a record of a transaction between the Carinth sovereignty and the Vrel hegemony, Marcus said, pointing to one display. 3 years ago, the Carinth sold development rights to Sector 891 to the Vrel for a substantial sum. According to Council law, development rights cannot be bought or sold. They can only be claimed and developed. Drell's entire body seemed to shrink. That transaction was a legitimate transfer of exploratory data, nothing more. Really? Because the communication attached to the payment specifically mentions development rights? Marcus pulled up another file. And here's another transaction. The Carinth selling Sector 634 to the Mordian Collective. And another, Sector 445, over the past 20 years. The Carinth sovereignty has sold rights to 47 sectors they claimed but never intended to develop. You've been treating the Galaxy like real estate, buying and selling entire star systems for profit? The chamber erupted. Delegates were shouting, demanding explanations. The smaller species, the ones who had been denied expansion for generations, were the loudest. They had been told there was no room for them to grow, while the founding species were secretly trading away sectors like commodities. But Marcus wasn't finished. He pulled up more files, these ones targeting different founding species. Trade agreements where the Vrel hegemony had secretly diverted resources meant for council infrastructure projects into their own. Military buildup. Communications showing that Prelate Thos's species had used their position on the council to sabotage competitors and secure favorable trade routes. Evidence of vote manipulation, bribery, and dozens of other violations of council law. For 10,000 years, Marcus said, his voice carrying across the chaos, the founding species have maintained order in this galaxy, but they haven't maintained justice. They've built a system designed to benefit themselves and prevent anyone else from threatening their dominance. You talk about law and order, but you only enforce those laws against species who lack the power to resist. Ven's voice cut through the noise like before, but this time there was something different in it, uncertainty. Where did you obtain these files? These are secured council communications. The human delegation has committed espionage against the council itself. We obtained them from sources throughout the galaxy, Marcus replied calmly. It turns out that when you oppress hundreds of species for thousands of years, some of them start keeping records. Some of them start sharing information. Some of them start working together to expose the truth. Ambassador Kellen stood up from his seat, his three tails held high. The Tauric Concordat confirms that we provided the humans with information about Carinth trading practices. We are tired of being told there is no room for us to expand while the founding species buy and sell the stars like property. Another delegate rose, this one from a species Marcus had never met in person but had been corresponding with for months. The Phoenix Union also confirms our cooperation with humanity. We have documentation of 50 years of council corruption. More species began standing, one after another. A cascade of voices declaring their support for humanity's revelations and their frustration with the existing power structure. The founding species watched in apparent shock as the coalition Marcus had been building revealed itself. Prelate Thos's mandibles clacked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. This is a conspiracy against the council itself. These species have coordinated to undermine galactic stability. No, Marcus said firmly. These species have coordinated to demand accountability. You've ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years, and in that time you've forgotten that power requires legitimacy. You can't simply claim the right to rule, you have to earn it. And you failed. Ven's crystalline body had lost its luster, the rainbow refractions dimmed. The human delegation has violated every principle of diplomatic conduct. You have stolen classified information, coordinated with other species to undermine council authority, and attempted to foment rebellion against established order. We've exposed criminals, Marcus corrected. If your laws mean anything, then those who broke them should face consequences. Or does council law only apply to species weak enough that you can enforce it against them? The question hung in the air. Every delegate in the chamber understood. What Marcus was really asking, would the council hold its own members accountable, or would it prove that its laws were nothing more than tools of oppression? Executor Drell finally spoke, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. You think you have won something here, human. You think exposing our private affairs will somehow change the fundamental reality of power in this galaxy. You are wrong. The Carinth sovereignty will not forget this insult. Marcus met his gaze steadily. Good, neither will humanity. That's what you're about to learn about my species, Executor. We have long memories. We remember every slight, every injustice, every threat, and we never, ever forget. The emergency session of the council convened 6 hours after. Marcus's revelations had torn through the chamber like a plasma storm. The founding species had demanded it, claiming that humanity's actions constituted a threat to galactic security. But the smaller species, emboldened by the exposure of corruption, refused to be silenced any longer. The chamber was more crowded than Marcus had ever seen it, with junior delegates and observers filling every available space. High Arbiter Ven looked diminished somehow, as if the weight of the exposed secrets had physically compressed his crystalline structure. The Council has reviewed the information presented by the human delegation. While some of the transactions in question may have violated the spirit of Council regulations, we find that no explicit laws were broken. Marcus had expected this. The founding species would protect their own, reinterpreting their laws to excuse their behavior while still condemning humanity for exposing it. But he had prepared for this response. High Arbiter, with respect, I have studied Council law extensively during my preparation for this assignment. Article 447 of the Covenant specifically prohibits the transfer of development rights through any mechanism other than formal cession approved by full Council vote. The transactions I revealed were conducted in secret without Council approval. That's not a violation of the spirit of the law. That's explicit criminal conduct. A delegate from the Yeneth cluster, a species Marcus had never heard speak before, rose from their seat. Their translated voice was thin and reedy. The human is correct. We have remained silent for too long while the founding species bent the rules to their advantage. If the Council will not enforce its own laws, then what purpose does the Council serve? More voices joined in, species that had been silent for generations suddenly finding their courage. The chamber filled with accusations and demands for accountability. Marcus watched the founding species delegates, seeing them realize that they had lost control of the narrative. The truth, once released, could not be contained. Executor Drell attempted to restore order by addressing Marcus directly. Even if we accept that some irregularities occurred, the human delegation obtained this information through illegal espionage. By Council law, any evidence obtained through criminal means is inadmissible. Rita whispered to Marcus, "He's right. If they disqualify the evidence on procedural grounds, this whole thing falls apart." But Marcus had anticipated this as well. The human delegation obtained no classified information through our own efforts. Everything we presented was provided to us by member species who have every right to share their own records and observations. We simply compiled and presented what others had witnessed. A technicality, Prelate Thomas's clicked. Law is built on technicalities, Marcus replied. You've used them to your advantage for 10,000 years. Now someone else is using them, and suddenly they're not legitimate? Ven raised one crystalline appendage for silence. Regardless of how the information was obtained, we must address the fundamental accusation. Does the human delegation assert that the Council itself is corrupt and illegitimate? This was the critical moment. Marcus could soften his position, accept the Council's offer of minor reforms, and secure humanity's place within the existing system. It would be the safe choice, the diplomatic choice, but it would also be a surrender to the very system that had threatened to destroy New Terra and force humanity to accept permanent second-class status. Yes, Marcus said clearly. The Council is currently structured as fundamentally corrupt. It exists not to serve the interests of all galactic civilizations, but to preserve the power of a small group of ancient empires who claimed the galaxy before others had the chance. That's not legitimate governance. That's colonialism dressed up in bureaucratic language. The chamber exploded into chaos. Some delegates shouted their agreement, others their outrage. The founding species delegates conferred urgently among themselves, their unity fracturing as they debated how to respond to this unprecedented challenge. Marcus pressed his advantage. The human delegation proposes a complete restructuring of Council authority. All existing development claims more than 100 years old should expire immediately unless the claiming species can demonstrate active development. The claim system should be replaced with an open colonization framework where any species can expand to any unclaimed system on a first-come, first-served basis. And most importantly, the Council should be governed by a democratic vote where each species has equal representation. Not a system where the founding species hold permanent seats with veto power. Impossible, Drell said flatly. Such changes would require unanimous approval from all founding species. That will never happen. Then the Council is admitting that it cannot reform itself, Marcus replied. That it will never willingly surrender power regardless of how corrupt or unjust its systems become. In that case, species who seek justice have no choice but to seek it outside the Council framework. Ambassador Kellen stood again, his violet eyes fixed on Marcus with an expression that mixed hope and fear. The Tauric Concordat formally requests to join with humanity in establishing an alternative governance structure. If the Council cannot represent our interests, we will create an organization that can. The floodgates opened. Species after species rose to declare their support for Marcus's proposal or their willingness to consider alternatives to the Council. Within minutes, over 100 civilizations had indicated their dissatisfaction with the status quo. It wasn't a majority of the Council's membership, but it was enough to create a genuine crisis. Ven's voice carried a note of something Marcus had never heard from him before: desperation. The fracturing of the Council would lead to chaos. The stability we have maintained for 10,000 years would be lost. There would be conflicts, territorial disputes, potentially wars. There are already conflicts, Marcus said. They're just one-sided, where the powerful prey on the weak and call it law. You've maintained stability by suppressing anyone who challenged the existing order. That's not peace. That's occupation. Rada touched Marcus's arm, her expression concerned. She pulled up a display visible only to him, showing military movements in nearby sectors. The Karen's sovereignty was mobilizing its fleet. The crisis was about to turn from political to military, but before Marcus could respond to this new threat, something unexpected happened. A delegate from the Mordian Collective, one of the founding species, rose to speak. The Mordians were an ancient species, silicon-based life forms who rarely involved themselves in council politics beyond voting with the other founding members. The Mordian Collective wishes to address the chamber, their delegate announced, the translation giving their words a grinding, mechanical quality. We have existed for 47,000 of your standard years. We have seen empires rise and fall. We have watched as younger species challenge older ones, as the old order resists change until change becomes catastrophic. The humans are not wrong in their assessment of the Council's flaws. We have become rigid, focused on preserving our own status rather than adapting to new realities. The other founding species delegates turned to stare at the Mordian representative in apparent shock. One of their own was breaking ranks. The Mordian Collective proposes a compromise. We will accept the human delegation's proposed reforms, but with a transition period of 50 years. Existing claims will be reviewed and those not actively developed will be released. The Council voting structure will be reformed to give all species proportional representation. In exchange, humanity will agree to work within the Council framework rather than establishing a competing organization. Marcus felt the weight of every eye in the chamber upon him. The Mordians were offering him almost everything he had demanded, with only the condition that it happen gradually rather than immediately. It was a reasonable proposal, one that would achieve his goals without the risk of galactic civil war, but it was also a trap. 50 years was enough time for the founding species to regroup, to find ways to undermine the reforms, to ensure that nothing fundamental actually changed. Marcus had studied Earth's history enough to know that gradual reform promised by those in power rarely materialized as promised. The human delegation appreciates the Mordian Collective's willingness to consider change. Marcus said carefully. However, we have concerns about the proposed timeline. 50 years is 2 human generations. The colonists on New Terra, whose immediate crisis sparked this entire debate, would be elderly or dead before these reforms took effect. That's not acceptable. Then what timeline does humanity propose? The Mordian delegate asked. 5 years for all reforms to be implemented. Claims review and release to begin immediately. Council restructuring to be completed within 1 year. Marcus kept his voice steady, though he could feel Rita's tension beside him. He was gambling everything on this counteroffer. The Mordian was silent for a long moment, consulting with their fellow founding species delegates. Finally, they spoke again. The Mordian Collective will agree to a 10-year timeline with immediate commencement of reforms. This is our final offer. Marcus looked at Rita, who gave him an almost imperceptible nod. 10 years was still a long time, but it was short enough that the reforms would have to begin immediately and would be completed within his lifetime. Most importantly, it would mean New Terra could remain a human colony. The human delegation accepts, Marcus said. The chamber erupted again, but this time it was different. This was not outrage or chaos, but the sound of fundamental change rippling through an ancient institution. Species were already negotiating alliances, discussing which sectors they would claim once the old system was dismantled. Planning for a future that looked nothing like the past 10,000 years, Executor Drell rose from his seat, his body rigid with fury. The Cairn sovereignty does not accept this agreement. Our claims are legitimate and will not be surrendered. Any attempt to seize Cairn territory will be met with military force. Before anyone could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the chamber. Red warning lights pulsed, and Ven's voice cut through the panic. We are detecting multiple hyperspace signatures approaching Terminus Prime, fleet-sized formations. They're dropping out of faster-than-light travel now. Holographic displays showed the space around the Council headquarters. Carinth warships were arriving by the dozens, their weapons powering up. The Sovereignty had decided that if they couldn't win the political battle, they would resolve the matter through force. The Council chamber descended into pandemonium as delegates scrambled toward emergency evacuation routes. The holographic displays showed 43 Carinth warships in formation around Terminus Prime, their weapons arrays glowing with charged energy. The station's defensive shields had activated automatically, but everyone in the chamber knew that shields designed to protect against accidents would not hold against a sustained military assault. Marcus remained at his position on the speaking platform, watching the chaos with an expression of calculated calm. Rita gripped his arm, her voice urgent. Ambassador, we need to evacuate now. The Carinth are broadcasting on all frequencies that they will open fire in 10 minutes unless the Council reverses its decision. They won't fire, Marcus said quietly. How can you possibly know that? Because they're not the only fleet in the system. Marcus pulled up his personal datapad and entered a command sequence. The chamber's central holographic display shifted, zooming out to show a wider view of local space. The delegates who hadn't yet fled stopped to stare, emerging from hyperspace on the opposite side of Terminus. Prime were ships displaying Earth's distinctive blue and white markings. Not just a few vessels, but a full battle group. 18 human warships, including the flagship Defiance, took up defensive positions around the Council station. High Arbiter Ven, who had been moving toward an exit, froze and turned back to Marcus. You brought a human battle fleet to Council headquarters. This is an act of war. This is an act of self-defense, Marcus corrected. We knew the Carinth would not accept losing their privileged position peacefully. We prepared accordingly. Executor Drell's eye stalks swiveled frantically between the displays showing both fleets. You planned this. All of it? The accusations, the coalition building, even the reforms? You manipulated the Council into a confrontation you knew would turn military. I planned for this possibility, Marcus admitted. Humanity has learned some hard lessons about dealing with empires who refuse to relinquish power. You always prepare for the worst-case scenario. But make no mistake, Executor. We would have preferred a peaceful transition. You're the ones who chose violence. More ships began arriving, vessels from dozens of species who had allied with humanity. The Tauric Concordat sent 12 ships. The Phoenix Union deployed their entire defensive fleet of 8 vessels. Even some of the founding species, like the Mordians, positioned their ships in a formation that suggested they would not support a Carinth assault, the space around. Terminus Prime had become a powder keg, with over 100 warships from multiple civilizations facing off. One wrong move, one nervous weapons officer, and the confrontation would turn into the largest space battle in recorded galactic history. Rita pulled up tactical assessments on her personal display. The Carinth have numerical superiority in this immediate area, But if the fighting starts, reinforcements will arrive from all sides within hours. This could cascade into a galaxy-wide war, which is why it won't come to that, Marcus said. He opened a direct communication channel to Executor Drell. Executor, I know you can hear me. You have a choice to make right now, and it will define the Karenth sovereignty's place in the galaxy for generations to come. You can open fire and start a war you cannot win. Or you can accept that the old order is ending and negotiate your place in the new one. Drell's image appeared on Marcus's personal display, his eye stalks quivering with barely suppressed rage. You have destroyed everything. 10,000 years of stability, of order, and you've torn it down in days. Do you understand what you've done? I've given hundreds of species a chance at freedom they never had before. I've exposed a system built on corruption and maintained through intimidation. And yes, I've ended 10,000 years of stability. But stability built on injustice isn't something worth preserving. Humanity will regret this, Drell hissed. We may lose this confrontation, but the Karenth never forget an insult. Never. Your species has made an enemy that will last for millennia. Marcus smiled. And there was something cold in it, something that made even Retta shiver slightly. You still don't understand, do you? You think long-term grudges and patient revenge are threats that will frighten us. But Executor, that's what humans do. That's what we've always done. He pulled up files on his datapad, historical records from Earth. Let me tell you about humanity's history with grudges. We have ethnic conflicts that have lasted thousands of years. We have families that maintain feuds across dozens of generations. We have nations that remember grievances from before they even had written language. Our entire history is built on long memories and patient revenge. Marcus leaned closer to his display, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. The difference between you and us, Executor, is that we learned to channel that instinct into something productive. We built systems of justice because we understood that unlimited revenge destroys everyone. But we never forgot how to use it when necessary. So when you threaten humanity with eternal enmity, with grudges that last millennia, you're not frightening us? You're describing Tuesday. Drell stared at him through the display, and for the first time, Marcus saw something other than arrogance in the Karenth's eyes. He saw understanding. He saw fear. The Karenth sovereignty withdraws its objection to the council reforms, Drell said finally, his voice hollow. We will participate in the transition period and abide by the new regulations. The Karenth fleet began powering down their weapon systems. Around the chamber, delegates who had frozen in terror began to breathe again. The immediate crisis had passed, though everyone knew this was only the beginning of a much longer transformation. Ven's crystalline body seemed to pulse with a mixture of relief and resignation. The Council accepts the Karenth sovereignty's commitment to the reform process. Old fleets will stand down and withdraw to non-threatening distances. This session is adjourned pending formal drafting of the new Council charter. As the delegates began to file out, many of them approached Marcus directly. Some wanted to thank him, others to negotiate alliances. Still others to warn him that he had made powerful enemies who would wait for their chance at revenge. Marcus received them all with the same calm demeanor, but inside he felt the weight of what he had accomplished, and the dangers it had created. Ambassador Kellen was among the last to approach. You gambled everything on a military standoff. If the Karenth had called your bluff, if they had opened fire, it wasn't a bluff, Marcus said. The Defiance and her battle group were authorized to defend Council headquarters if fired upon. We would have fought, and likely died. 43 ships against 18 is not favorable odds. No, but it would have been enough to ensure that the Karenth lost as well. That's the thing about humanity, Ambassador. We're willing to pay terrible prices to defend our principles. Sometimes that makes us noble. Sometimes it makes us terrifying. Usually it makes us both. Raita finally allowed herself to relax slightly, though her hand remained close to her sidearm. What happens now? We've restructured the Council, exposed decades of corruption, and made enemies of some of the galaxy's oldest civilizations. Where does humanity go from here? Marcus walked to the chamber's panoramic window and looked out at the fleets beginning to disperse. Ships from 100 worlds that had faced the possibility of war together and chosen peace instead. Not because peace was easy, but because the alternative was unthinkable. Now we prove that the new system can work, he said. We show that democratic governance isn't just Earth's peculiar obsession, but a model that can function on a galactic scale. We help the species who have been suppressed for so long to finally expand and thrive. And we remain vigilant because the founding species will try to undermine these reforms at every opportunity. We've made ourselves the galaxy's policemen, Retub observed. No, we've made ourselves the galaxy's conscience. There's a difference. We're not here to rule anyone. We're here to make sure no one can rule everyone else the way the founding species did. Director Hammond's face appeared on a secure communication channel. Ambassador Webb, Earth's government has been monitoring the situation. On behalf of the entire planet, I want to say well done. You've achieved more in 1 week than we dared hope for in a generation. Thank you, Director, but the hard work is just beginning. Restructuring the Council will take years, and there will be resistance every step of the way. I have no doubt. But you've proven something important today. You've proven that humanity belongs on the galactic stage not as subjects or supplicants, but as equals. You've shown that we won't be intimidated by ancient empires or traditions that benefit the powerful at the expense of everyone else. And most importantly, you've demonstrated that humans never forget. Not injustice, not kindness, not threats, and not allies. The communication ended. Marcus remained at the window, watching as the last of the Cairnth ships departed, their weapons cold and their formations broken. Somewhere in the depths of the Cairnth sovereignty's territory, Executor Drell would be planning his revenge, plotting how to restore his species' lost status. Let him plan. Humanity would be ready, because that was what humans did. They remembered. They prepared. They adapted. And they never, ever forgot. Retied him at the window. Do you think we'll actually pull this off? Reform the Council, create a more just galaxy, all of it. I think we'll try, Marcus replied. And I think that trying is what matters. The founding species maintained their power for 10,000 years by convincing everyone that the system couldn't be changed. We've proven that wrong. Whatever happens next, at least we've shown that change is possible. And if the Cairnth come for revenge? If other founding species decide humanity is too dangerous to be allowed to exist? Marcus smiled, that same cold smile that had unsettled Executor Drell. Then they'll learn the same lesson Earth's own empires and tyrants learned throughout our history. You can oppress humanity for a while. You can make us bow and scrape and accept unjust terms. But eventually we'll remember. We'll organize. We'll resist. And when we do, we'll make you regret every moment you spent thinking we were weak. He turned from the window to face Retta fully. That's the real reason the founding species should fear humanity. Not because we're militarily superior or technologically advanced or politically sophisticated, but because we combine all of those things with something they've lost over there. Millennia of comfortable dominance. We remember what it's like to fight for survival. We remember what it's like to face impossible odds and win anyway. We remember what it costs to be free, and we're willing to pay that price again and again. Rita nodded slowly. Humans never forget. Never, Marcus confirmed. And now the galaxy knows it. Far below them, Terminus Prime storms continued their eternal churning, indifferent to the political upheaval occurring in the space above. But the galaxy itself had changed. Power structures that had seemed immutable for 10,000 years were crumbling. Species that had been silent for generations were finding their voices. And at the center of it all stood humanity, the newcomers who had refused to accept their assigned place in the galactic hierarchy. The future was uncertain. There would be challenges, conflicts, perhaps even wars. But there would also be opportunities, possibilities, and hope for species that had almost forgotten what hope felt like. And through it all, humanity would remember. Remember their allies. Remember their enemies. Remember every promise made and every threat uttered. Because that was what humans did. They never forgot.